Well, hello there, and welcome back to War Thunder. And in this video, I'm going to, I guess, engage in a little bit of a rant. I've kind of just come to a point where I just feel like I need to sort of vent, and this is the best way to do it. I'm not going to discuss the gameplay at all, but simply because there's two fundamental things I think that War Thunder Ground Forces needs to change and needs to do it quickly. Basically, once British tanks come in, I think the next priority for this game should be these two items. And the first item is vegetation. Vegetation cannot be an option. It's exceedingly frustrating when you're kind of playing the game the way it's meant to be played, with bushes, trees, and obstructions in the way, and other people clearly aren't. It makes for an uncompetitive game. It makes it very difficult for the people who are trying to play properly. And I understand that there are people out there who do not have the technology to play this game at acceptable frame rates with vegetation on. The problem I have is I do not believe that that's actually the reason. I mean, we know that's actually not the reason a lot of people do it. A lot of people do it to gain the competitive advantage, which I get, but at the same time, there's nothing competitive about it. You know, there's nothing competitive in scoring tons of kills with vegetation on. I've seen people have sent me replays where vegetation was clearly off, and yeah, they scored a ton of kills, and it was amazing gameplay until you see them pull off shots that, with vegetation on, are simply not possible. Like, you can watch it back as many times as you want in slow-mo, and even when you know the tank is there, you can't see him. And it's only when you go and you turn off vegetation that you're like, oh, now I can see the tank. And there are times when people see things that I don't, maybe, but they're not that often. They're not that many times in one game. Vegetation is the biggest one. It cannot be an option simply because it, like I said, just ruins the competitive spirit of this game. And there's just zero things competitive about it. And to the argument where people need to turn it off to play the game, well, one, I don't think that's as many people as people who make that argument seem to believe. Now, there's I don't have statistical evidence, and I don't think really anyone does, that that population is that big. But honestly, at some point, I just kind of stopped caring. And the reason is that if you want to play a competitive game, at some point, it's kind of tough cookies. Now, it sucks to say that, but as it stands, you have to draw the line somewhere. World of Tanks does it. You know, vegetation is on. And in World of Tanks, granted, it doesn't really matter. So if you wanted to find a compromise, arcade battles in War Thunder, you can turn vegetation off. But if you have vegetation off, it should be impossible to play realistic or simulator battles. And that's just how it needs to be. You know, if your computer or your machine just cannot run War Thunder at acceptable frame rates with vegetation on, then, save up money. Try and upgrade your equipment and figure out a way to do that if you want to play the side of the game where concealment and tactics like that are important. Because if you're just running around with vegetation off, all of a sudden you have this ridiculous advantage, right? And it's probably not as many. It's probably been blown out of proportion, but the fact that it's a possibility to turn it off is enough to frustrate me a little bit. And that's what's kind of brought a lot of these feelings to a head. Now, the second point that I think is fundamentally wrong is the map borders. Now, when I say that, I mean being able to exit parts of the map and kind of be in a space that you're not supposed to be in. For example, Cuban, being able to climb up onto those ridges that surround the map it just shouldn't be allowed. There's just no reason why someone should be able to do that. And I don't blame people who do it, because sometimes it's their only option to try and win the game. But I also think that the map should be designed in such a way where that's just not possible. And that's not a hard thing to do. If the tanks get capped, I believe, at 41 degrees maximum inclination, make the slope 42 degrees, 43 degrees, and tanks won't be able to traverse up it. Done. Make that a ridge around the entire map that says, you can't go out this way. And you see on big flat maps like Poland, it just tells you return to battlefield. And quite frankly, I've never left the battle. When it says return to the battlefield, I just turn around and come back in. So I'm not entirely sure what happens when you leave, but there should be some consequence. And if there is, good job. But on Cuban, jungle's another one where you can get onto ridges that you just really shouldn't be on. And those are fundamental problems that need to be addressed. And until they're addressed, it's very difficult to have compelling gameplay when, you have to fight within the confines of the map, but then someone just nails you from a million miles away on a ridge with vegetation off and they can see everything. That just doesn't work. That doesn't work for me. So I understand that British tanks are coming, and I'm very excited about that, and I will be covering that. But I think once British tanks get here, the next priority has to be fixing these fundamental issues at least. Now, you can talk all you want about, balance issues and things like that, battle rating system, and my opinion on that is that those are less fundamental than the previous two issues I've stated. I can deal with tanks being overpowered. I can deal with tanks being stronger maybe than they should, or problems with armor, or even with armament. That's fine. That's easier to fix, right? I think the harder thing to fix is to make that conscious decision to say, if you can't run this game the way it's supposed to be run, or even within acceptable standards for a competitive gameplay experience, then almost tough luck. It sucks to say, but that's just kind of how it needs to be, just to preserve some type of competitive nature in a competitive online game. If you don't do that, you lose the competitive spirit, and then you have this whole situation where the community you've developed becomes less about it just becomes less gameplay centric and more comedic, and which is fine. But I like to take an analytical approach to this game, and it's very difficult to kind of analyze what happened when the problem was they had a competitive advantage that I didn't have because I chose not to have it, because I think it's wrong, and they can do it within the confines of the game, and it shouldn't be a thing. And if you are one of those people out there who just does not have the equipment to run this game on, with vegetation on at the minimum settings, I apologize, but it's just one of those things where sorry not sorry, because I can't. It's difficult. The right words are difficult, but it's just too much of an advantage. It's too much of a problem with a competitive game. If you want a competitive game, you have to make sure everyone's playing on the same level. And if some people are playing with vegetation off, some aren't, there's not the same level. And if vegetation's off, about half the battle, or half of what makes tank combat exciting, is gone. And that's the whole concealment, ambush, how to avoid being detected, how to use terrain to your advantage, how to use vegetation to your advantage. Without that, without that, you might as well play World of Tanks, in all honesty. Arcade battles, it doesn't matter, but realistic and simulator, it's incredibly important. And the map confines are also incredibly important, because when someone's in a place that they really shouldn't be, they can rack up big games just because, no one looks. And I don't blame anybody for that. So that was just my 9-minute rant, and yeah. It's exceedingly frustrating, and it's something I'm really struggling to deal with, and until it's dealt with, I'm not going to feel good about it. Even when British tanks come in, there's going to be apprehension, but I'm going to cover British tanks, but it's kind of like after British tanks, I'm looking for changes, and if there's not changes, then, I don't know what to do at that point. because the game, they're in a rapid stage of development, but at some point you have to make considerations for what you've done and fix the problems that have occurred. So anyway, I want to thank you guys for watching. I've been Corny Swiss, and I'll see you next time.